Hello and welcome to our lesson on management of cash. And in this lesson, we look at the management of cash. And to begin with, we can start by defining some key terms. We can start by cash. And we can say that cash is the ready currency to which all liquid assets can be reduced. It is the ready currency to which all liquid assets can be reduced. And then we have marketable securities, another term we'll be using frequently. Marketable securities. So marketable securities, on the other hand, these are short-term interest earning money market interest instrument. These are short-term interest earning money market instruments. Money market instruments. These are short-term interest earning money market instruments. Now, the level of cash and marketable securities held by the firm. The level of cash and marketable securities held by the firm will be determined by its motives of holding them. So let us look at the motives of holding cash and marketable securities. Cash and marketable securities. Let us look at motives of holding cash and marketable securities. Now, the first motive is transaction motive. The first motive is transaction motive, and this motive requires a firm to hold cash to conduct normal business. And the firm needs to make payments for purchases, wages and salaries, and other operating expenses in the company or in the firm. So we can say that this motive requires a firm to hold cash to conduct normal business, to hold cash to conduct normal business, to hold cash to conduct normal business. Number two, the next motive is precautionary motive. Now, balances held mainly in highly liquid marketable securities to cater for unexpected demand for cash or emergencies. So these are balances that are held in highly liquid marketable securities, held in highly liquid marketable securities to cater for unexpected demand. demand, to cater for unexpected demand. And the reason we don't hold it as cash but rather as highly liquid marketable securities is because idle cash doesn't earn any interest. But if we hold them as highly liquid marketable security, and highly liquid marketable securities means that at any point we can sell those marketable securities and get cash. Number 3. Next we have speculative motive. Speculative motive, we can say that a firm may want ready funds to hand or to take advantage of opportunities that may arise. To take advantage of opportunities that may arise. To take advantage of opportunities that may arise. So the working balance of cash is maintained for transactional purposes. And if the firm has too small a working balance of cash, it will run out of cash, and it then liquidates marketable securities or borrows, both involving transaction cost. So if on the other hand a firm maintains too high a working balance, it will forego the opportunity to earn interest on marketable securities, and this will be an opportunity cost. The optimal working balance occurs when the total cost, which is the transaction plus the opportunity cost, are at a minimum. And finding the minimum will involve a trade-off between finding the transaction cost or falling the transaction cost against the rising opportunity cost. Now I want us to illustrate this using a graph. I want us to illustrate this using a chart. So we have on one hand we have costs, and on the other hand we have cash balances. So we have seen there are 3 major costs. Actually there are 2: the opportunity cost and the transaction cost. And our main aim will be to reduce those 2 costs. Now let us look at the transaction cost. So the transaction cost, the curve of the transaction cost will look like this. If we have a very low balance, we can start from this point. If we have a very low balance, say starting at that point, then our transaction cost will be very high at this point here. Our transaction cost will be very high. But the more we increase our balance, the more our transaction costs go down. The more we increase our balance, the more our transaction cost goes down. And this will be our transaction cost. And they will decrease, and up to a certain point they become flat, they remain constant. Now what about the opportunity cost? The more we hold, or the more we have a bigger cash balance, the larger the opportunity cost. And we have seen that the opportunity cost, this is the interest we could have earned had we invested that money in securities, in a security exchange. Now, starting our curve from, let's say, somewhere here. If we have our cash balance, say at 0, then our opportunity cost will be 0. But as we increase our cash balance, the opportunity cost increases. As we increase the cash balance, the opportunity cost increases. So it will look something like this. As we increase the cash balance, the opportunity cost increases. The opportunity cost increases. Now we have this point where these two curves meet. We have these 2 points where we have this point where these two curves meet. This will be our optimal cash balance. Optimal cash balance. That will be our optimal cash balance. And if that is our optimal cash balance, then it means that our total relevant cost curve will look something like this. The cost will decrease as we increase the cash balance. It will remain constant, and then it will increase back again. It will increase back again. It will increase back again. So this is our opportunity cost. And this is our optimal cash balance, or our total relevant cost. Our total relevant cost. Our total relevant cost. So to determine the optimal cash balance, the firm can use either of these two models to determine the optimal cash balance. To determine the optimal cash balance, the firm can use either of the two models. The first one is known as Baumol's model. And number 2, we have Miller or model. So we start with the first one, Baumol's model. So Baumol model, or the Baumol's model, is a deterministic model which assumes certainty of variables. The deterministic models which assumes certainty of variables. Which assumes certainty of variables. It considers cash management similar to inventory management. It considers cash management similar to inventory management. And thus the firm attempts to minimize the sum of costs of holding and cost of converting marketable securities to cash. So in this model, we will be interested in managing two costs, just like the inventory management. One, the cost of holding cash, and number 2, the cost of converting marketable securities into cash. Converting marketable securities into cash. The cost of converting marketable securities into cash. Now, Let us look at the model itself. It's very similar to the EOQ model, and we have it as follows. So the optimal size of cash transfer, the optimal size of cash transfer will be given as 2dc over I, 2dc over I, the square root, 2dc over I, the square root, where D is the annual demand of cash, or the amount the cash outflow, or the demand can be the cash outflow or the demand per year. And then we have C is the transaction cost for each sale of a security. Transaction cost for each sale of a security. Then we have I is the interest rate and per period. Interest and per period. And per period we mean per year. And this also can also mean the cost of holding cash rather than investing it. This can also be the cost of holding cash rather than investing it, what we are calling as opportunity cost, what we are calling as opportunity cost. So that will be the optimal size of cash transfer. Let us look at an example. We have an example here where we are told that a company anticipates 150 million in cash outlays during the next year. The cash outlays are expected to occur evenly or equally throughout the year, and the company treasurer reports that the firm can invest in marketable securities yielding 8%, and the cost of shifting funds from marketable securities to the portfolio to cash is 7,500 shillings per transaction. Assume the company will meet its cash demands by selling marketable security. Using Baumol's model, determine the optimal size of the company's transfer of funds from marketable securities to cash. What will be the company's average cash balance? How many transfers from marketable securities to cash will be required during the year? What will be the total cost associated with the company's cash requirements? And how will your answers in A and B change if the transaction cost would reduce to 5,000 shillings per transaction? Or if the triad could invest in marketable securities to yield 10%. Let's go ahead and try that one out. So we have an example. So in this example, the first part, they want us to determine the optimal size of cash transfer. The optimal size of cash transfer. Determine the optimal size of the company's transfer of funds from marketable securities into cash. So the optimal size of cash transfer this will be given by 2dc divided by I square root, where we take 2 multiplied by the annual demand for cash. Let's go ahead and get the annual demand for cash. The annual demand for cash, we are told that the company anticipates 150 million in cash outlays. So times 150 million in cash outlays. And then C is the transaction cost for each sale of security or borrowing. So the transaction cost, we saw it as 7,500 times 7,500 divided by the interest rate. So we are told that the interest rate in this case will be 8%. So divided by 0.08, and then we get the square root of that one. So if I feed this on my calculator, I get 5,303,301. That will be our optimal size of cash transfer. So next wanauliza, let's see the next requirement. What will be the company's average cash balance? What will be the company's average cash balance? So average cash balance. What will be the company's average cash balance? So the average cash balance will take the quantity we have gotten, then we divide by 2. That will give us the average cash balance. So we'll have 5,303,301 divided by 2. And this will give me 2,651,650. That will be the average cash balance. Next, we go ahead and solve the cash turnover. The cash turnover. So the cash turnover in this case is simply the number of times we have to sell those securities. Higher, since our annual demand is 150,000 divided by the amount we need to sell every time, the amount of transfer, the amount of cash transfer, or the optimal size of cash transfer, divided by the optimal size of cash transfer, which is 5,303,301. So if we divide those two, we get 28.28 times. 28.28 times. The next part of the question, they're asking us what will be the total cost associated with the company's cash requirement. What will be the total cost associated with the company's cash requirement? What will be the total cost associated with the company's cash requirement? But we have not yet finished this cash turnover. So cash turnover, these are times, but we need to get the cash conversion cycle. So we take this 28.28 divided by 300 and the number of days in a year. The number of days in a year. The number of days in a year. So we have 365, assuming 365 days in a year, divided by 26.28 times. This will give us 13. This will give us 13. So now we can go ahead and compute the other one. Compute the other one, which is total cost. The total cost. The total cost. And in this case, the total cost associated with the company's cash requirement. So we will take the holding cost plus the transaction cost. The holding cost plus the transaction cost. The holding cost plus the transaction cost. So what will be our holding cost? Our holding cost, we will take the average cash requirement. The average cash requirement, we had calculated it earlier. We saw it was 2,651,650. 2,651,650. 2,651,650. And then we multiply that one by the rate. We multiply that one by the rate, which is the interest rate, which is 0.08 times 0.08. So this will give us 2,651,650 multiplied by 0.08 is giving me 212,132. 212,132. So that will give us our holding cost. Holding cost. So we get the transaction cost, and the transaction cost is 7,500 per transactions, and we are doing a total of 28.3 transactions. We are doing a total of 28.3 transactions. So 28.3 transactions, again, it's giving us 212,250. So they are very close. They are very close. So we go ahead and add these two. Go ahead and add the two. We get a total of 424,381. 382, and that marks the end of it's very similar of that example. It's very similar to the inventory management problem, the EOQ model. Now let's go ahead and look at some of the assumptions of this model. Let's go ahead and look at some of the assumptions of this model, and they are very similar. So assumptions. The first assumption is that, number one, the firm is able to forecast its needs with certainty. With certainty. Number two, we can say that the opportunity cost of holding money is known and constant. The opportunity cost of holding money is known and constant. Another assumption we have made we can say that the transaction costs are known and constant. Transaction costs are known and constant. And then number 4, again another assumption is that the firm's cash payment occur uniformly throughout the year. The firm's cash payment occur uniformly throughout the year. They occur uniformly throughout the year. Now, in our next session, we will be looking at the other model, which is the Miller-Orr model.